The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. You're listening to KSQD, and I am your host, Len B.A. And as I have as my guests this evening, representatives from Housing for People, which is a local initiative campaign in the city of Santa Cruz. And we're going to get right into that after I introduce my guests. We will have one of our guests will be leaving after the first half of the show, and Candace Brown will be coming in at 5:30. So we've got four folks with us here. Keresha Durham, Susan Monheit, and Frank Barron are here right now. Welcome to all of you. It's great to have you live in the studio. Keresha Durham is a local high school teacher. She's a bilingual teacher focused on environmental science and protection. She's been teaching since 1987. She's been an environmental and climate activist for over 30 years and served in several local eco-organizations and as chair of the City Transportation Commission to increase clean and human-powered transportation. She is proud to say she got rid of her car to help our climate about 20 years ago, and she happily walks and bikes every day, rain or shine. Keresha Durham, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Thanks, Len. It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting us.
Susan Monheit has enjoyed a 30-year career in environmental protection. She's recently retired from a position as Unit Chief for Water Quality in the Division of Water Rights at the State Water Resources Control Board in Sacramento, a position where she supervised the development of environmental impact reports under CEQA to regulate water flows and habitat restoration to support recovery of endangered species. Susan has a master's in environmental management from the University of San Francisco, and she has published 2 scientific research papers in the peer-reviewed journal Human and Ecological Risk Assessment. Susan Monheit, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And Frank Barron is here. Frank Barron is a retired land use planner with 30 years local and Monterey Bay area experience in the public and private sector. He has experience in regional, environmental, city, county, and special district water agency planning. He has also worked as a regional planner at the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, often referred to as AMBAG, including preparing the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Report, which is relevant to the initiative we'll be talking about. The Regional Housing Needs Assessment Report distributes the regional housing needs allocations of the state to each of the cities and counties in the Monterey Bay region. Frank Barron, welcome.
Thanks, Len.
So, just to get started, I wanted to ask each of you what drew you to this issue and how you got involved. And I'll start with you, Frank.
The thing that was the impetus for this initiative drive was the city's proposal to expand the downtown plan to the south of Laurel area. And as part of that, the original plans were to include 17-story skyscraper and 3 15-story skyscrapers in that area, where Wheelworks is and the Kaiser Arena. And so that a lot of us thought was very extreme for Santa Cruz. Too tall. With the biggest building currently is about 6 stories, 6 or 7. And so that we decided to put together this initiative that would require a vote of the people when the heights are increased. So that's basically that was why we got started. Was that?
All right, Susan, how about you?
Well, Frank and I live near each other, and he asked me if I had seen what the downtown plan expansion planned in terms of height, and I had reviewed the document and commented on it. And at the time I reviewed the document, I thought the heights were 5 stories. And he said, no, they're proposing 22. And I was like, what? So we were having
it's taller than Beach Hill.
It certainly is.
By a bit.
We were having an information fair in the area where we lived, and we put out some clipboards and sat down and had a group talk about that issue along with emergency preparedness and other things.
And Keresha, how did you get involved in this?
Well, I've been aware of these plans because I've been writing letters to the city council for many years. I wrote 14-page papers just commenting how the city council isn't really going along with the general plan, and environmentally how there's a lot of problems with large-scale buildings, especially along the river there and the river habitat. And so, I've been aware about the plans for over 10 years, and I was greatly concerned because often we would have, fill city council meetings, and it seemed like they didn't listen to one word. It was just they were allies of the developer and not listening to their constituents.
Yeah, and I've had the same experience where you literally can count, how many people speak on each side of an issue, and I've seen situations where it was like 4-1 against something, and the city still went ahead and adopted it. And it kind of makes you wonder what representation means in terms of government. For the benefit of our listeners, Frank, I wanted to ask you, since I know you have a planning background, to just explain what the general plan is and how it works under California law.
The general plan is kind of like the constitution for local governments, for the cities and counties. And so it applies to a number of different realms that the cities and counties have jurisdiction over. There are several required chapters of the general plan called elements. So one of them is the housing element that a lot of people have heard of. There's also land use element, circulation element, public safety, seismic safety, noise, and several others, conservation. So those are all required parts of the general plan. And then everything in the city government feeds off of the general plan, like the Constitution of the United States, where things like the zoning code have to be consistent with the general plan.
Right, and if they change the general plan, then they have to update all the other ordinances and codes that go with that, right? And we do see that going on. So, for example, right now, I think all the jurisdictions, at least the city and county of Santa Cruz for sure, but I think all the jurisdictions in the county right now are updating their housing elements, which is a part of the general plan. So great timing in the sense that here's an issue that relates to housing. So you mentioned that the city had proposed 22-story buildings, and I understand they've backed away from that a little bit. So what exactly is the city proposing now that would be changed if this initiative gets on the ballot and passes? And I'll direct that to you, Keresha.
Well, they have gone from 22 stories, though it's not really clear and it is not written down. So one thing that is an impetus for this initiative is the proposal now is to go up 12 stories, which is still double the height. If people want a comparison, a concrete example, look at the building that they're finishing building on Laurel Front and Pacific, and that would be double the height. And it's unspecified. They say 12 stories, but is that 145? Is that 155 feet? We just know it's very high. And another thing I wanted to add is one impetus to get this initiative happening now is we are trying to do it before. They are planning to upzone the city to 12, and we know from city planners that have told us that 16 and 20 stories is still being investigated in the EIR. So we want to get information and have our input before the city is upzoned to very large, what we call mega developments.
Right, and when you talk about them working on an EIR, what's the specific change that they're doing the EIR for at this point?
Well, the environmental impact report evaluates all the potentially negative impacts of a project. So there are many aspects to this project that need to be considered and studied. There are seismic concerns on the unconsolidated alluvial soils of that floodplain. There's water issues, there's traffic issues, there's sunlight issues. If you have multiple 12-story buildings, and we don't know how many would be built, you lose solar radiation and solar energy, solar light. I'm very concerned about seeing a cold microclimate between large cement buildings where the sun isn't penetrating. Frank,
Yeah.
you want to add to that?
Yeah, so there is actually a proposal that they can say, this is what we're considering, that's at least official enough to base the EIR on, right?
The proposal is for 12-story buildings. They the original proposal that was going forward was for one 17-story building, 175 feet to be precise, and then three 15-story buildings, or 150 feet to be precise. So that was the original proposal, surrounded by about 6-8 story buildings throughout the entire 29-acre area. So there would be these 4 larger buildings surrounded by 6 to 8 story buildings. That was the original proposal. When Fred Keeley came into office, he proposed that instead of 17 stories, it go down to 12. But they never specified how many 12-story buildings. So the current proposal is there's going to be 12-story height limit, but with an unspecified number of 12-story buildings. Also, they did not specify the number of height in feet. So it could be 12 stories, but if it's 15 feet per story, that's 180 feet. It's probably not going to be that, but it could be anything, because
But it's not
they didn't
unusual for
specify.
the bottom story or two to be quite a bit higher than the
They didn't
ones above
specify.
it.
So the project includes that. It also it would include 16. Originally, they were saying 1,600 units max, but then they're kind of fudging on that, so it might be 1,800 units. And
Is this just the south of Laurel area that they're talking about adding to the downtown district, or does it include all of downtown?
It's a 29-acre area. It's south of Laurel. It includes those blocks that are right next to the river where the Kaiser Arena is currly. And then there's Wheelworks, a little tire place just to the north of that.
There's
then
a used car lot.
The Ace Hardware, and then the former Saturn Cafe building. So that whole shopping center going all the way down to that car lot you're probably referring to, which is Aloha Motors.
Pacific in front there.
Lots Auto Stereo. That whole area, plus the whole area going all the way down to the traffic circle. The traffic circle at where Depot Park is.
Right, of course.
And just walking that neighborhood and knocking on doors, I want to say that it includes 2 very important buildings that are low income housing and extremely affordable. There's a building behind Ace Hardware, 2 stories, and also another building behind the Warrior Stadium that house Section 8 and neurodivergent people, mentally, challenged people. So that will this plan will displace.
That would displace people who are already in the affordable housing category, as it were.
And where do they go? This is displacing, a couple hundred people.
Right. So there is this regional housing needs allocation, and I believe that we're supposed to have something like 3,700 or so units. Can you give some background on what the expectation is as far as what's been allocated to the city of Santa Cruz for new units?
The current cycle extends through the year 2031, and it's 5 times higher than what it was in the previous cycle. The previous cycle we had a target of 750 units. Now it's like 3,750. So it basically is 5 times more. And that 3,700, and it's actually 3,736 is the exact number.
Okay.
And it's broken down into categories, income affordability categories. So the bulk of it is above market rate, they call it,
Above
market rate. It's
income.
market rate.
Yeah.
So it's above moderate. So then the other lower
and moderate
income
is not market rate these
Exactly.
days.
The
Market
lower-
rate is above moderate, because moderate income is what you call, the average, right? The median.
Yeah. It's actually on both sides of the median. So,
Yeah.
and then going down from there, you have low income, very low, extremely low, and acutely low. So it is broken up into those categories.
Yeah. But as you said, 1,606 of those, as I look at the chart, are the above moderate income category, which is, for if you're an average income person, which I understand, average income in the city of Santa Cruz is 80-some thousand. Is that correct?
I believe it's more than that now for just even a single person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, they don't consider those 1,600 to be affordable to you if you earn in that 80-some thousand.
However, whoever
average
wants to
income
buy
range.
it can afford,
It's-
and
yeah.
we have the biggest economic engine in the world just over
Okay.
the hill.
But so there is some kind of obligation. I've never seen enforcement of this happen historically, but there is some kind of a obligation on the part of the city to make it possible for builders to build some 3,736 units over the next, how long a period is that?
8-year RENA cycle.
It's actually 7.5 years.
7.5 year cycle. So what's our problem? I mean, we can't build that many now?
Well, one of the problems is the myth that we do not have enough space. The city has to do this inventory, and in doing the inventory for the housing element, they discovered that we have more than double the units. We have like 8,364 units of potential space. And so the idea that
Wait, this is with existing zone.
with existing zoning before we upzone. So we do not. They're saying that, oh, I'm sorry, we have to build. This state inventory is forcing us to build, but that is not true in our case. And another point that people should know is that we are one of the few cities in California that are reaching these state mandates. We're like 6% of those cities. And in actuality, many cities are just saying, we can't do it. It's impossible. Your numbers are so overinflated.
Interesting.
And we should talk about declining population. There's been articles in the paper in the last few weeks that California's population is declining, so that would make these numbers even more overinflated.
And
Susan, you want to add? to
yeah,
that?
I just wanted to clarify that it's a fallacy that we have to rezone the city to allow higher buildings in order to meet the RENA numbers. There's adequate housing locations available without having to increase the zoning beyond what's currently allowed in the general plan.
We don't need the 12-story towers to meet our RENA.
Interesting. Yeah. So if you're just tuning in to Talk of the Bay here at KSQD, I want to let you know that I have here as my guests 3 citizens involved in a citizens initiative drive in the city of Santa Cruz: Keresha Durham, Susan Monheit, and Frank Barron. And we will soon be joined by Candace Brown around 5:30 here. So, and we've been talking about the issues surrounding the city's proposed rezoning of the area south of Laurel Street, in basically adding that to the downtown district and zoning it for apparently at least 12-story buildings, and there's some unknowns that perhaps even taller buildings than that would be possible with this rezoning, because it hasn't been specified in writing in very particular terms yet. So if we don't need it, where would the housing end up if we don't change the zoning? Where is the new housing going to go, or could it go? I know it's not. We don't make the developers build it, but we have to enable them to build it, right? So where is it likely to end up?
Well, in that 29-acre area, the city has already determined that that can hold 1,200 units under existing zoning in 5 to 8-story buildings. So that's existing zoning. That would be a huge bulk of that RENA target could be accommodated there. Elsewhere throughout the city, I mean, they've already had areas that are zoned for along the corridors, the so-called corridors: Mission Street, Soquel Avenue, Ocean, and Water Street. So those areas, a lot of those lots along those areas have been upzoned to allow for taller buildings that would accommodate quite a few units as well. So much of it is in those areas. There are vacant areas around the city as well.
Right, and we have some projects that are permitted but not built yet, or not finished yet at least. Do those figure into this number? And
I'm not sure exactly if the ones that are being built now are I don't know if they are those are considered part of this RHNA or the last RHNA. I think it's probably going to be this current one rather than the previous one for most of them. So we have several big buildings that are being done right now. One's just being finished up at Pacific and Laurel Street. A lot of people know about that, the former Taco Bell site, so-called Anton Pacific. There's also several along, or I think two at least, along the river on Front Street that the area has just been cleared, where some of those dance studios and other businesses were, and that's been completely cleared, and they have fences around it. That's about to become a 7 to 8 story, two 7 to 8 story buildings in there, and so there's going to be a lot of units there as well.
Right, that's a lot of additions. So it sounds like, we're meeting our state obligation much better than most jurisdictions in the state. So it seems like the drive to rezone this downtown expansion area south of Laurel, why would someone want to do that? I guess I'll pose that as a hypothetical.
Well, as Frank was saying, that many areas around town are zoned for 8 stories and up to 8 stories, and that is plenty dense and provides, and lots of housing. So the impetus behind that is this, to go up 20 or 12 or much higher, of course, is a huge developer's, land grab, and they can make billions of dollars. This is a destination location. Santa Cruz is very special. Lots of people want to live here, even if part-time. We see after COVID a lot of people coming here and working remotely. And I think when we have an affordable housing crisis, I'm a school teacher, I see it every day. We can't staff our schools because of the lack of affordable housing. It's forcing more and more people. When you were mentioning average incomes, I'm thinking our area median income, low income, is up to $94,000. A new teacher makes $30,000 less than that, like $64,000. So we're being forced to move to Watsonville and further and drive. And as an environmentalist, I'm very concerned about that. I think forcing people to live further and further away from where they work is not helping human-caused climate change.
And it doesn't make for a better quality of life for those people either. And I know it's just anecdotally, I've had a number of people who live on the west side saying more and more of the houses in their neighborhoods near Westcliff Drive are becoming just vacation homes, that they're just not occupied very much of the year at all. And so that means we're essentially diminishing the available housing stock for people who would benefit from living here full time. Go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to your question. The impetus for that downtown expansion plan, at least the one that they're saying is the reason, is for the Warriors, the Santa Cruz Warriors. They're in this kind of ragtag, temporary kind of tent where they play now, and they want to have a new arena, and they don't want to pay for it. They, sometimes in situations like that, the city ends up paying for it, in other cities, but the city is not going to pay for it. So they need real estate revenues to pay for a new downtown arena, and so that is kind of the impetus. That is the reason why they're doing that.
Right, and we definitely have a predicament for cities, particularly in the U.S., that they depend on property tax revenue largely. And so they have this motivation, if they're finding themselves short of funds for a pet project, that they want to do the projects that increase the tax revenue for a given property.
And my view is that the Warriors don't need a fancy stadium. They could, instead of having a Cadillac stadium that requires a bunch of 12-story buildings to pay for it, why don't they just have a Toyota stadium for with 6-story, 7-story buildings to pay for it?
I'd like to add that the Warriors have made no commitment and have no contract binding them to stay here for any amount of time. And we see what's happening in Oakland with the Warriors A team moving to Reno, I think it is. And that's after the city built a new arena for them. So the idea that we're going to keep them is maybe hopium. Hoping that if we build it, they will stay. But they've made no commitment, and these sports teams are meant to earn money, and they will follow where the money is greatest.
Right, and I mean we've obviously seen that with teams leaving towns and going to where they're offered a bigger bang for the buck. So it's an interesting problem. So. There is an argument that we should concentrate all our new development downtown instead of letting it spread around different neighborhoods. I took a look at density in various cities and noted for cities such as Philadelphia, Montreal, trying to look for some examples in North America, they have population densities that are typically on the range of 4 to 5 times what they are in the city of Santa Cruz. And if you look at the building stock in those cities, they average 3 to 4 stories. What's different is they have a lot of row houses. That is, just like you see in San Francisco, houses that the sidewalls join to the sidewall of the one next to it. So they're relatively high density in that sense. They don't have as much yard space. But you're looking at, block after block after block in these relatively dense cities that are all 3 to 4 stories. And they're, as I said, 4 to 5 times the density of Santa Cruz. So clearly we don't need 12-story buildings to get that density. The key is what kind of development, if we're going to have development, what kind do we want? So what would this initiative do, if you can summarize how this would actually affect city policy?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just really clearly state that this initiative does 2 simple things. It increases the affordable housing component of large new developments greater than 30 units, from 20 to 25%, which is what Planning Commission has been recommending for over a year, but the City Council refuses to take the issue up. The second thing it does is give people a vote and a right to choose if they want to allow buildings that exceed current zoning height limits in the city. Now remember that the general plan, our city constitution, that took 7 years to develop with extensive public participation. It already planned for more density and higher buildings. We've talked about the south of Laurel area allowing 5 and 8 to 8 stories if a bonus density bonus, and that's a developer entitlement that it allows them to build 50% more if they meet a minimum requirement of affordable units in the base project. So it's really a matter of direct democracy. If citizens of this town want to have a voice in what the town is going to look like in the future, this initiative will give them a voice before the city is rezoned. So what the initiative really does is prevents the city from rezoning neighborhoods for high-rise developments without a vote of the people. And if this initiative is on the ballot, people can either vote whether or not they want to have a voice in the future, or whether they want to leave those decisions up to the developers and the city council, who have shown themselves to be great allies for the developers.
Great. Well, we're going to take a really short break, and we'll be back with more conversation with some of the citizens who are involved in a citizens initiative called Housing for People. And we'll be right back. Don't touch that dial. You are listening to Talk of the Bay here on KSQD, and I'm your host, Len B.A. we have had some guests here who are with the Housing for People Initiative campaign in the city of Santa Cruz. Keresha Durham has had to take off, but we are now joined by Candace Brown. Candace Brown is a graduate of psychobiology and accounting with honors. After a few decades working in high tech, she studied key issues of land use and transportation and recognized many serious overlooked impacts with rezoning. She formed a group named Branciforte Action Committee, which organized a series of community forums to bring awareness to city planning and its impacts, focusing on solving the real affordable housing needs of Santa Cruz. She has served on the Save Santa Cruz Steering Committee on Reimagine Santa Cruz, and for over 3 years, she has been a City Transportation and Public Works Commissioner. In her second career now, she works as a tax accountant. Candace Brown, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And still with us are Susan Monheit and Frank Barron. Susan Monheit has had a 30-year career in environmental protection, a lot of work focused on water rights and water quality. And Frank Barron is a retired land use planner who has worked in the Monterey Bay area and locally, including worked on the regional housing needs allocations for AMBAG, which actually is a great deal of bearing on the initiative that we're talking about. So you all got together, you formulated an initiative. I'm assuming you got some legal help along the way to get the language right. What the initiative does is it increases the inclusionary zoning amount from what's now 20% to 25% on new developments over 30 units, and it requires a vote of the citizens to approve any new construction that's over the existing height limits that were established for the city. Is that right? Am I nailing that down?
Yes.
So the inclusionary zoning, as that currently works, if someone is building a large structure with a residential structure, they have to make sure that 20% of those units are affordable based on the formulas, based on local income data. And increasing that, what you would do is bring that from 20%, which is 1/5 of the total, to 25%, which is 1/4 of the total. But this is, technically, if you wanted it to satisfy the average person in town, you'd have to make it like 50%. So how does that work? And do you consider inclusionary zoning really a good way to solve the issue of affordable housing?
So this is a really good question, and inclusionary zoning has been a part of our charter since the late 70s, and it's an important part because it basically says on any development of a certain size that you would have, originally it was 15%, and then during the recession they actually completely eliminated it at one point, which was against the charter, and they did that without a vote of the people, interestingly enough, which is why I've really become interested. And so I felt that it's important that if there was any changes, that it's very clearly stated that there has to be a vote of the people, because there are things in the past that have been done that in order to rectify it had to actually, a lawsuit had to be submitted so that the inclusionary was reinstated. Also at one point they tried to change it from 15 down to 10, and that was also reinstated because, again, there wasn't a vote of the people to change the charter. And so they immediately buckled when the lawsuit came about. But they did it anyway, so that's something to note. What's happened, though, since the state density bonus, which has been around for a while, but they've added about 100 laws in the last 5 or 6 years that have really emphasized the idea of the state density mandates. And so they have basically usurped the inclusionary laws. And so it's only applies now to the base. And this is such a complicated discussion, but if you have a certain footprint and you have a certain mass ratio, which is called FAR, then you calculate how many units can fit within that sizing, and that number then allows them to do a bump up of 35 to sometimes 50%, depending about the amount of affordable housing. You would think there'd be more affordable housing than inclusionary, and in fact, we're seeing less because the density bonus dilutes the impact of the calculation that's only calculated in the base.
Right, because you have a base project that has 15% affordable, but because they get the state mandated density bonus,
Right.
they can add on to the total number of units without making any of the additional units affordable, right?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, so you end up with less than 15%.
So instead, right now across the city, when I looked at it, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was about 8%. And we really haven't moved far from that. So we really haven't seen any impact. So there's a false narrative when you say that these state mandates are driving up affordable housing. That's not the case.
Right.
And the inclusionary is being...
They're driving up housing production, but they're not making those units affordable.
Right. So people think that if somehow you can build your way into affordable housing with these state mandates, and that simply is not happening. And so what you're seeing down south is now there's some lawsuits happening, which our city has opted not to take part in. But there's some legal scholars now that are backing up these claims.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely something that is worth considering.
Right, and I know that right now there are a few projects either in the planning stages or even in construction that are 100% affordable, but those are relatively small number of units compared to the larger projects in the pipeline. Is that
Yeah, in
the
fact,
state?
the reason why I got involved is because I really think that the community really should have more involvement, because you can have wonderful projects such as 708 Water Street, which is a completely 100% affordable, and 20% is for disabled. And it's a beautiful building. And the interesting part about it is when I tell people about it, they're like, which building? Because it's so well integrated into the fabric of the area. We made sure that it didn't affect the view shed coming off Branca 40. We made sure the roofing and everything didn't look really industrial. And we also made sure that it honored the area of Branca 40. So Jim Rindler of Future Housing Now was amazing ultimately in taking the feedback, and actually we sent him all kinds of different designs, and he integrated it quite successfully.
Wow.
After a few community meetings. So
Yeah. And that project, I understand, is approved but hasn't started construction.
Oh, it's built. It's been in existence now
it's
for
built.
3 or 4 years. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
See, you don't even
So,
know that
see,
it
it's that
exists, but yet it's there.
Yeah, exactly. So designed so
And
well
it's a
that we didn't
4-story
even
building, yeah.
notice that.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
If it's well integrated and designed, then we also asked them to set it back. We asked them to have courtyards for places for people to gather, because even though they're disabled, and they had this ratio 1/3 car per unit kind of thing. We said, well, each caregiver would have one parking. So we insisted that we did all kinds of our own parking studies in the neighborhood and show that it was parked out. So we ended up getting more parking. I talked to the manager, as a transportation commissioner, and she said she was so happy that we did that because the parking lot is full with the people that are there.
Yeah, and it really helps to know that the concrete reality of what it is that a given facility is going to experience.
Yeah.
So this initiative, if it passes, gets on the ballot and passes, then you could still get taller buildings if voters wanted them, right? I mean, you just have to submit that to a vote, right?
Right. The voters would get to decide whether they wanted to rezone a certain area for the proposed building height. So if they want the tall buildings, they can vote yes. And if they think that's too high, they can vote no. It gives a voice to everyone in the community.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to come back to the inclusionary zoning issue. I know that it's obviously can't address all the housing needs for affordable housing, but it looks like increasing it from 20 to 25% at least gives us a little bit additional, right? So I'll just ask you sort of a strategic question. Why didn't you shoot for higher than 25%? What
The
was the thinking
25% level for larger developments of 30 units and more was something that was vetted by the Planning Commission, and it was deemed to be something feasible that the developers could feasibly do. However, at some point, the city staff or someone, decided that the city council should not vote on it, and they never did take it up. So it was passed, approved by the Planning Commission and recommended by the Planning Commission to the City Council, but the City Council never got to vote on it.
Right.
So now we'll let the people vote on it
Great.
if we get on the ballot. So we still need a
Right.
lot of signatures to get on that ballot. We're kind of a little bit behind the 8 ball right now. It's crunch time. We need thousands more signatures in the next few weeks here. So we are asking your listeners to get involved, to sign the initiative, sign the petition, the initiative, to get it on the ballot. And you can do that at the farmers markets, Saturday farmers market over at the west side, over by the old Wrigley's building there. That's from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. And then the Wednesday downtown farmers market, which just happened today,
Right.
that one happens 1 p.m. to 6 right now. I think it might be changing back to 5 pretty soon, but
Yeah.
so those are the two places that if you wanted to come out and just sign it, you could search us down. We're pretty obvious in those two locations. We also have a website that you can go to and get information. It's housingforpeople.org. That's all one word, housingforpeople.org. And you can donate to our cause there. We are taking donations to help fund some of our paid signature gatherers. Most of us are volunteer signature gatherers. But we do need a lot more signature gatherers, and so we need help getting this thing over the finish line.
Right. So if somebody just wants to get all their friends to sign it, they can pick up a petition, right? And
That's right.
Get it filled in. And
They can come
turn it
down
back
to
in.
the farmers market and say, I'd like to take a petition, and we'll note down who has taken it, take it around to their friends. We have precinct walking notes of who was registered in the last election, so we can specifically just target registered voters. And that's actually the best way to get signatures, because you're not talking to a lot of people who aren't registered here or a certain address or are not city residents.
But don't wait for us to come to your house. Come out to the farmers market.
Come out
And
to
go
the farmers
website.
market
Talk
Yeah.
to Frank.
Yeah.
and
great.
go to the website. Thanks.
And I know for the signature to count, if you sign the petition, it will only count if you are a registered voter in the city of Santa Cruz. Do signature gatherers have to be registered voters in the city, or can
No, they
anyone
just
do
have
it?
to be over 18.
I see.
Yeah.
Over 18.
Yeah, eligible to. Yeah.
Which is generally eligible to vote if you're a citizen.
And it's very easy, even on your phone, to register to vote on the spot. What's the
Registertovote.ca.gov, right? Keresha? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Registertovote.ca.gov.
if you've come up to the farmers market and you've moved recently, we need either your address where you are registered, or just to have you open your phone and re-register. It takes about 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Great. So and I want to return to this before we finish up tonight, but I wanted to ask another question. We've seen projections of sea level rise depending on what happens in terms of action on getting greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And a 6 foot sea level rise by 2100 seems quite possible, maybe even probable at this point. Although some projections put it at a much lower number. But I happen to see a map of the parts of the city that would be flooded with a sea level rise of 6 feet, and that included much of that south of Laurel neighborhood. Needless to say, tall buildings need deeper and stronger foundations. Would the flooding of this area jeopardize the stability of 12-story buildings?
Those 12-story buildings probably are going to have pilings that go all the way down to bedrock. But one of the proposals that they are talking about, which would really impact the whole floodplain, is to have this huge amount of earth piled up against the back of the levee to make it a nice kind of a sloped street going up to the top of the levee. This huge amount of material would displace any floods that happen and would push those floodwaters out further and higher into the rest of the floodplain, all of downtown going, So that's one of the problems with the proposal. But the EIR will be evaluating, we asked that the EIR, Environmental Impact Report, evaluate the sea level rise impacts and also the flooding impacts.
And levee stability. I have a lot of concern about the excavation to get down to bedrock, destabilizing the existing levee.
Right, and the existing levee is just earth fill. It's this is not a concrete wall there. That's like an earth dam type construction, but it's for the side of the river. So you mentioned you need a lot more signatures. I just want to ask you, like, specifically, how many are required to get an initiative on the ballot, and how many do you have so far?
Approximately 3,700 are required, and we have about half that.
Okay. All right. So you're looking to get another, call it 1,800 or so
in the next
signatures
5 weeks or 6
in
weeks.
5 weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we're counting the clock here.
Yeah, come on down to the farmers market and pick up a petition to take around to your friends, and then get that back to us within a week if you can, so we can see where we are and how hard we need to be pushing.
Or at least before October 8th.
Yeah,
Go
and
on
if you
our website.
and you can go on, and you can also go to your website, housingforpeople.org.
Housing, yes,
right?
housingforpeople.org, all one
And
word.
that'll give people a source of where to find you.
And we can run a petition out to your house. If you can't come to the farmers market, we're happy to do that.
Great.
So I've been walking on the east side, for about a month, and I'm finding that this is a very moderate proposal, and many people are very concerned about the direction of the city, and they don't feel like they have a say anymore, and that the city council and the mayor now is not really listening. So there's a broad range of political spectrum here, and everybody's signing the petition that I've talked to.
Yeah, this is not a partisan issue. This is
No,
about
exactly.
what kind of city you want to live in.
It's more of a
in
moral
Santa
and
Cruz.
ethical issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
And transparency.
And transparency.
Yeah. So we've seen other citizens' initiatives that have gotten on the ballot get defeated, sometimes fairly narrowly defeated, when they're sometimes outspent as much as 5-1, and then they lose by 2 or 3%. How are you going to overcome high-paid campaign consultants and lavish advertising budgets that kind of outside money can bring against an initiative that they don't want to see pass?
Well, like any good campaign, you basically talk to the people. And the one thing that I really like about this campaign is that most of the people out there are volunteer signature gatherers, and we're literally going door to door, and we're having that conversation. And yeah, you can get 5 flyers, but I don't think that's going to have the same effect as what we're doing right now.
Right. Yeah. And it seems further that if you've got something simple, I mean, this is a relatively simple message. It's not very complicated. There's nothing to. It would be pretty hard to misinterpret what it says. Which I've seen happen before, where basically something is branded as something that it isn't, but that advertising works. But it'd be kind of hard to brand this as something that it isn't because it's so straightforward. But there's a larger question here, of course. I mean, obviously, this would require a vote to get above existing height limits, and it would increase the inclusionary zoning very moderately. But beyond that, where do you see the city going? Where would you like to see the city going in terms of making this a place where people who have grown up here and live here can continue to thrive here, and where the people who work here can have an opportunity to live here?
I would like to see the city moving in a direction of building a livable city that's built around social infrastructure, places for people to gather, to have community. We're a destination location. If you look around the world, what makes up a destination location? It's intimate, small places, low-rise buildings, places for people to gather, where streets are safe for pedestrians and bicycles and traffic is slowed down. We have built our cities to the gods of cars who speed through, and we are constantly behind and rushing. So for this to be a livable city, we need to slow down, and it will be a place that people want to be. What's being proposed to be built is not that.
So,
Candace, you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
besides the 100 state laws that have come about, there's something unique to Santa Cruz that really people don't grasp. We have a unique zoning in Santa Cruz that's nowhere else in the country, and it's called flexible density units. And so it allows them to have as many units as can fit without having a minimum amount allocation that accounts for open space and setbacks and balconies, which is called private open space. And so in order to maximize the density, they removed all of that. They did it originally with single occupancy units, which are for entry-level ownership, and then they eliminated that, and now they're just doing these flexible density units, and all are rental. And so you can almost double the amount of density. So for instance, at 831 Water Street, that's zoned for 55 units per acre, in the general plan. But with this flexible density units, they eliminate that, and it's what can fit within the mass of the assigned area. And so they can fit over 150 units per acre, which is really only seen in major urban settings. We don't have, as a transportation commissioner, we don't have adequate road system with the streets as a historical beach town to create a complete street scenario with, for the safety of, as Susan said, for the pedestrians and bicyclists, and also for rapid transit for buses. So if we can't do that, and we don't have light rail, we don't have, underground subways as we do in New York and in other means, or trolley systems or anything else, then the question is, how are you going to move people about the city? And and especially now, I'm really concerned about major disaster situations such as what we're seeing in Maui right now, and what could happen.
Yeah. Well, we have 1 minute left, and so I wanted to. I'll invite you to start, Frank, and if there's time, anyone else has something you want to say to.
Well, to
close
sum
us
up,
out.
I just wanted to reiterate that our initiative, if it gets on the ballot, and we do need a lot of help getting it on the ballot, but if it gets on the ballot and it passes, it would be on the March ballot. It would do two things. Number one, it would require a vote of the people when a developer wants to have a development that is going to go above and beyond what is already existing allowed, which is quite high in many places of the city. So number one, it does that. Number two, it increases the affordability rate to 25% of the new units in the large developments of 30 units and more. So it does those two things. Requires a vote, direct democracy, requires a vote of the people for height. And number two, increases affordability.
And I'd just like to add that if this initiative gets on the ballot, people will be voting for whether or not they want to have a voice in the future. They will be voting on whether or not they can vote in the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank you, Susan Monheit, Frank Barron, and Candace Brown, and Keresha Durham, who was here earlier, for participating in this interview.